Welcome to What's Your Signal, the podcast exploring the latest trends in enterprise technology, network security, and how we connect people, places, and things. You're joined by me, Taylor Walker, and my co-host, Mauricio Stefan. Hey, Mauricio.
Hi, Taylor. How's it going?
It's going good. I like your radio voice today.
Just trying to recover. It's been a long week of travel, and then you get the ick from traveling, planes, trains, and automobiles. So
Yeah, I totally get that. And I was going to say, let's chat about an article that I found, but I can tell you don't have much of a voice, so I'm going to chat at you. I did recently read an article in SNS Telecoms and IT's, well, it was their latest research report. I guess it wasn't really an article. And something that kind of caught my eye that you might find interesting is that they predicted that global spending on private network infrastructure is going to account for more than 6.4 billion by the end of 2026, which a number I can't comprehend. And about 40% of those investments, so nearly 2.8 billion, is going to be directed towards the build out of things like standalone private 5G networks. They're going to become the predominant wireless communications mediums to support things like Industry 4.0. And I was thinking about this because we've recorded an episode about private cellular before with Kim and Pear, one of our early episodes. And it was fun to talk about how those networks fit into different verticals and kind of how they might be used. But as I'm looking at these numbers and how the industry is growing, it got me thinking that I wonder if there's companies out there who are investing in private cellular and they understand the benefits and maybe they're really excited about it, but they aren't as well versed in the challenges. I feel like I personally do this all the time, like when I bought a juicer, but I didn't realize that it would take me an hour to clean it after every use. And then I'm like, why did I get this? And so that's kind of what we're going to be chatting about today, is diving into more of the challenges of putting up a private cellular network and maintaining it. And
yeah, it's funny that you bring up the challenges because private cellular networks will solve a lot of problems, right? Up until today, the primary medium for connectivity within IT or even OT applications has been Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi is great. It's been around for decades. It's a tried and true technology, but it does have its drawbacks as well, especially in applications such as manufacturing or other logistics, ports, warehouses. Things that typically are just challenging RF environments with a lot of machinery that generates interference, whether that's electromagnetic interference or just general interference from metal shelving or metal walls or those kind of things. And so cellular was a technology that was born to kind of overcome some of those things as far as distance and density of clients and those kind of things. So it definitely has its benefits, but it does have its challenges as well. Like I said, Wi-Fi is a tried and true technology in enterprise. As such, it's evolved to make it a lot easier to deploy and maintain and manage, whereas cellular has traditionally been, limited to a few, and I'm going to say a few, globally we're talking about hundreds of operators, though, that maintain this for more of the public use and not just for a single entity. And so the infrastructure doesn't necessarily have to be that easy to deploy because they're only deploying it or redeploying it once every 5-10 years. And they're only deploying it, and I'm going to say a few, but, relationally, millions of cell sites, but that's still a few compared to the tens of millions of enterprises and hundreds of millions of locations that those enterprises could want to deploy it. So, as private cellular, I think, matures as a technology for the enterprise, I think it will become easier. I don't typically do this, but giving a little plug for Cradlepoint itself, right, is Cradlepoint's trying to develop private cellular in a way that enterprises understand and making it easier to deploy and easier to manage. And I think that there are a lot of companies out there that are trying to do that as well to make it easier to go from deploying something like Wi-Fi to deploying something like private cellular.
yeah.
So
Well, we do have a couple of folks here to help us talk about that and kind of dive into some of those challenges that businesses face when they're looking for a custom solution. So here today to help us do that is Global Head of Business Development for Private 5G at Amazon Web Services, Chris McKenna, And from Ericsson, Private Networks Marketing Lead, Alistair Glover. A few episodes back, we did an episode called The Sizes and Shapes of Private Cellular. And on it, we chatted a lot about private cellular use cases. And what I really want to start with is just a quick refresher before we get too deep into today's topic. So that way, in case someone's listening who hasn't heard our previous episode, they kind of have a little bit of an introduction. Alistair, could you start? Can you just give us like a overview of what a private cellular network is?
Yeah, sure. Well, maybe to start off on the network, which we all know, or whether we realize it or not, a public network. We all have, or most of us have, mobile devices. We make a phone call, someone picks up on the other end, and that's using a public network. Private network, on the other hand, is something which is more localized. It's owned, operated, and usually managed by a private entity. So it's a dedicated wireless communication network. It uses licensed spectrum, provides dedicated coverage to specific areas for a specific organization. I think that's about as good as a definition as I can come up with here.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Chris, anything you'd add?
The simplest way I often explain it to people is Wi-Fi on steroids. So it's like a Wi-Fi network, but it's more performant, it's more secure, it's higher powered, but in many regards similar to Wi-Fi.
Chris, what would you say are some of the key things that enterprise businesses need to consider before they invest in this steroided product?
Yeah, I think it all starts and ends in many cases with a strong business case. If an enterprise identifies the outcome that they're aiming to achieve and build a business case around that, then it really helps to validate the purchase upfront. But crucially, it also helps to validate the success of the project later on. So after it's been deployed, how can you point to it as being a success? And again, that goes right back to the business case. So putting the work in upfront to nail down a very solid business case is always the first place that we recommend enterprises get started.
Yeah, I mean, really just to echo what Chris said, digitalization, sometimes we think it's new. It's actually been happening for a long time. So it's happening. There are more things that are growing into that idea of digitalization, digital transformation, Industry 4.0. And so with digitalization, where it's come to up to this point, chances are that most companies will have identified some problems. So I think a business problem is probably been, a current business problem has probably been identified, and maybe future business needs as well. And so to figure out how to solve for those problems or future needs with some kind of smart solution or whatever you may need is a good way to start. And usually, I mean, certainly because we're talking about it, usually that's also going to require some kind of connectivity solution, private network, private 5G network, to enable that solution to solve the problem or the future need.
Yeah, I can give you a really good example of one of those. Actually, we co-authored a white paper last year with Ericsson, so AWS and Ericsson together. We put an Ericsson private network into a manufacturing site. In this case, it was Hitachi as the customer, and running on the network, we deployed AWS cloud services at the edge to do default detection using AI. And the outcome of that was that we could analyze 64 components at the same time it was taking to analyze one component, doing it in the old way, which was a manual check. So there you see, real business benefit. It speeds up their operations. It means they can spot defects so much faster and adjust the factory line, all using private networks and AI at the edge.
So I want to get into kind of the meat of this episode, which is some of the potential challenges of moving into a private cellular solution. And so when customers are creating that initial business plan that you guys were each talking about, are there some things that businesses need to be wary of, or things that are often overlooked when they're creating that plan as it relates to private cellular networks?
One thing I would say is a differentiator here between these networks and Wi-Fi networks are that the spectrum that is used to deliver these varies from country to country and depends on the regulatory landscape. So you need to apply for spectrum, and in some countries like the US, where there's an automated way of doing this, it's very easy. In some countries, there is no dedicated spectrum for this, and you need to go to an operator to get spectrum for them. Or in some countries, there is dedicated spectrum, but there's a lengthy process for requesting it. So that's one area I would say the enterprises may not be used to having to deal with spectrum access issues, but definitely something needs to be considered upfront.
Yeah, and I was actually going to say the same thing. Spectrum has been the maybe the major challenge, which enterprises, which organizations come across first. Of course, the mobile network operators are coming to the party, and they've done all the auctioning, and they've sliced and diced it up, and they've all got their sections which they are trying to get use out of. But it is happening, right? Either from the network operator, CBRS in the US, other countries like Germany have industrial spectrum. So spectrum is being made available, but it is still, maybe one of the earlier problems or challenges which enterprises are coming. And there's more and more, so there are things to address those problems as well. Routers and gateways to bridge the gaps, edge devices, ensuring networks can connect and things like that as well.
Do you guys happen to know, or this is just my own curiosity, like what the process is for some of the businesses in those countries? I'm thinking of how complicated it can be to even get like an additional stop sign on my small neighborhood street, and it's like you've got to get all these signatures, and you have to have this meeting, and you've got to get this funding, and what do some of these businesses have to do to be able to secure that spectrum?
Yeah, I don't want to comment too much on this. It's not really a field which I work in. What I do know is that if the operators or whoever is providing the spectrum wants the spectrum to be used, they want enterprises or corporates to adopt it and to use their spectrum, they need to make it easy for companies to do that. It can't be a bottleneck or a blocker to move on. So I know that there is a lot of work and effort being put in to make sure that companies can use it. It's not a long, tenuous process, so that companies who want private 5G, private cellular, have to do this for years and years. But yeah, it's not something which I really work with too much, so I don't want to comment too much there.
It also, it varies from country to country as well. A process in one country can look completely different from a process in another. The US have made it very, very simple. It's automated. There's a platform where you can request spectrum and get it immediately, and it deals with interference or manages interference and ensures that different enterprises are not taking the same spectrum and broadcasting over each other. That's one end of the scale. Other end of the scale is where there's absolutely no spectrum available. We must procure through an operator, and again, every operator has a different process as well. So it really does vary, and it gets complicated, especially if you're an enterprise that spans many countries. Then you want to go and deploy the same private networks in multiple different countries. Then you're into the realms of then having to deal with regulators and MNOs in each of your countries. So it's a complex, very complex topic.
But it's also one of the benefits of working with the mobile operators is they are essentially the experts in it. So if you are a company, let's say for instance a mine which is in the middle of nowhere where there is no spectrum available, you can work with the operator and they can help you get that out in the desert or whatever the example might be. So it really is, it's worthwhile working with the operators, but it also depends on what your need is. If whatever your operation is, whatever you're trying to run, whatever use cases you're trying to address, maybe something like CBRS or industrial spectrum is something which is suitable for your needs, then that's great, and you've got that available, and you can start building your network on that. Maybe there's something, an issue with that, where you need the operator, you need the network operator to be on board with you and to be helping you manage it and helping you integrate it and stuff. So there's a lot of options out there as well. I guess a lot of it is to figure out exactly what you need.
So, Chris, earlier you mentioned you described PCN as a Wi-Fi on steroids. Based on that, what do you see as the challenges with the learning curves for enterprises to be able to move from, say, like Wi-Fi deployments to private cellular deployments?
Yeah, this is a very valid question, especially this year, because we're seeing the emergence of solutions that are more enterprise-friendly than the previous iterations of private networks. So the early adopters of private networks were very large, complex deployments. Places like, Alistair mentioned the mine there, so places like mines, ports, massive warehouses, where really they needed the breadth of reach that a cellular network can give you that Wi-Fi can't. So think of big, massive areas, university campuses, big areas that you want to blanket with coverage. And these networks look a lot like MNO public networks. They're using many of the same technologies, conforming to the same standards, the 3GPP standards. And what that means is that the people that are deploying them and managing them, running them, need the skills in telco networks. But what we're seeing this year is an emergence of private networks that look more like enterprise products. So they're integrating with the enterprise identity and access management systems, for example. And really they're coming as managed services. So customers are able to now procure it from someone like Ericsson or AWS, and have the whole thing delivered as a managed service and integrating into their enterprise environment. And what that means is that more enterprises will adopt it. If it's easier to deploy and it's less complex and looks less like an MNO massive network, and more like the enterprise networks that they've been deploying for many years themselves, then I think we'll see a lot more adoption, and that's the change that we're seeing this year.
Yeah, if I can jump in there, it's quite amazing to watch when you're kind of on the inside. Companies like Amazon, AWS, and Ericsson and Cradlepoint. When you're on the inside, you see this new generation of problems which need to be solved, and those problems are being solved by a new generation of smart solutions. And this new generation of smart solutions needs something which is wireless, and not just any kind of wireless. More and more so, something which is cellular, and not just any cellular, but 5G cellular technology, right? So it's really interesting and fascinating to watch how this is all happening. It's been a process, it's been a journey, but it's really the trend is accelerating. And as that need becomes more evident to companies, the more the adoption of private cellular networks is happening.
Yeah, and that's actually why AWS and Ericsson and Cradlepoint are working so hard together, because we're seeing enterprises come with many more use cases today that are valid for private networks. And, Ericsson have the pedigree of deploying these networks for MNOs and for enterprises. And AWS have the pedigree of deploying cloud services to solve some of those business problems. So really bringing them together we feel is a very strong offering, Ericsson and AWS together. And we're able to solve for use cases across just about all you can think of.
Yeah. I was going to say it's an ecosystem thing, right? It's very seldom, or if ever, it's a one company has all the answers. Maybe it's Ericsson with some of the radios and the network infrastructure, and AWS with cloud, and another partner like Cradlepoint making a a gateway or a device and so on. And together, the ecosystem comes together to create an end-to-end solution which addresses the use case. And I know you've already had a podcast on use cases, so I don't want to dive too much into that. But it's an ecosystem thing. So working with AWS, Cradlepoint, it's all part of offering the solution to the end user.
So I have a question that kind of dovetails from the ecosystem idea. Are there challenges for enterprise businesses who are attempting to set up a private cellular network, but maybe they have a lot of legacy equipment or legacy technology that they're working with? Do they have to make these big upgrades from the ground up, or is a private cellular network something they can kind of tack on to the old things that they have? Are those hurdles?
Well, I think that's a really important point. And sometimes we get too excited and we like thinking about all the future capabilities that 5G or whatever might offer. And we like talking about drones and robots and all those things. But we forget that companies have, like I mentioned earlier, companies have been running digitalization programs for a while. And if they take a new network, like a private 5G network, they need to make sure that their current infrastructure, their current use cases and solutions can be built onto that new network. So that's really important. You need to be able to put the existing, the legacy, as you call it, things onto that as well. And there's ways to do that. Of course, there's different routers and gateways to bridge these things to make sure that your current devices, whatever the example might be, can be used on the network, whether it's a 4G or a 5G, things like that. But what's also important is that more and more we see the importance of the path towards something 5G. So if you're running things which are maybe Wi-Fi or 4G, whatever the example might be, that's fine, and you need to be able to keep running those things. But you also want to have the forward-looking, the easy route to something 4G for the more complex or the more sophisticated smart applications as well.
Yeah, you hear us talk a lot about IT/OT convergence. That's the sort of buzzword of the day in this space, and really it is the direction we're going in is where private cellular and private Wi-Fi or wired networks will all be managed in the same way with the same tools, and will coexist. And it's not one replacing the other. We see there will always be coexistence. But what's the crucial change is the ability to manage all of that from one place is becoming simpler.
Yeah, that's right. There's a place for different solutions. So some solutions only require some connectivity or one type of connectivity, and I guess there's a place for everything. But if you start running into problems like siloed subnetworks, you've got 50 plus Wi-Fi networks to run your digitalization programs or your factory or whatever, like that presents a lot of problems. So if you are able to reduce all of that onto a single network or something, then that solves a lot of problems as well.
With any new technology, I feel like there comes down the road this realization of vulnerabilities. Are there some vulnerabilities or security challenges that businesses should be wary of when it comes to private cellular? I hear so much about how much more secure it is, but are there different types of vulnerabilities that people need to watch for?
I think enterprises definitely need to avoid falling into the trap of thinking just because I have a private cellular network, then it's inherently secure. They are subject to the same vulnerabilities that they can. There are bad actors out there who can install command and control software, etc. So what I would just say is don't fall into the trap and ensure that security is always at the forefront of your strategy, and ensure that whatever you deploy, that you have the right level of visibility of what's going on in the network, so that any bad actors can be stopped. And again, if you're procuring it as a managed service, then it's the managed service provider's job to do that. So make sure you speak to the managed service provider about the security of the network, and have them take you through their controls and how to, how they manage the network. Or if you're building and deploying it yourself, there are many security firms out there who have specialist products in this space for observability and security. So yeah, that would be my only advice, is don't assume everything is automatically secure, because there are plenty of bad actors out
Yeah, that's it's one of these things. If you have something which is valuable and worth securing or protecting, then there's somebody out there who's possibly after it. Like Chris says, bad actors. And so if you are digitalizing your operations, not to use, all these industry 4.0 buzzwords, oil is the new, data is the new oil, data is the new gold, all of these things. But there's some truth in that. It's if you're creating this data, which you're using to make your operations more efficient and smarter, and making good decisions using data, then you need to be able to protect the data. Private networks are, as far as I'm aware, the best way to do that. 5G itself is more secure than other wireless networks as well, and then the private network also has a whole lot of protocols, ways to keep things protected. But certainly there are people out there who are trying to get around that. And yeah, I think it's foolish if you to think that there aren't, or that these things are just handled and secure without some real good thoughts and planning put into it.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't want a bad actor roaming around your network if you're a nuclear power plant, for example. So you can imagine the types of things that could go wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really is a great example. I mean, we've done some work with energy utilities, nuclear utilities, and security is absolutely paramount to them. They cannot let anything get out, right? For obvious reasons.
Are there, Chris, I like that you brought up the point of just the name alone, that it's a private cellular network, that people might think, oh, that means nothing can get in. I also think that there's an amount of hype around the term private cellular network that makes businesses think they can put this network in place and they don't have to have anything else. So is that true, or should companies still have redundancies in place to ensure business continuity? Is this kind of like a fix everything, or part of a larger solution?
As always, there's no magic bullet here. I think companies should always have business continuity plans, regardless of which technology they're deploying. Cellular is a very proven technology. It's very robust. But if you deploy 2 radios inside a factory and the power goes off to both of them, then you're probably making the same mistake that we all did back in the original Wi-Fi days, thinking that was going to just solve everything. So no, you still need good process, good governance, and business continuity plans, because things can always go wrong.
I still get confused when the power goes out at my house and then my Wi-Fi isn't working. I forget. I'm like, wait.
Yeah,
that's happened to me.
You can take it for granted, right? And maybe that's exactly when things start going wrong. But things like redundancy is crucial to a lot of the industries which we speak to. Manufacturing, maybe specifically automobile manufacturing. Those long production lines are so efficient. When anything goes wrong, if there's any disruption, to quote a well-known quote, it's time is money, right? So you need to have those failovers, and there's a whole list of different types of redundancies and things, but they're absolutely crucial. to keep things running, to save time, to reduce downtime, and all these things as well. And of course, we can talk about the security topic with that as well. But it's absolutely crucial to these, or to the industrial industries, which I mostly focus on. But of course, there's a lot of other industries which are taking on private networks as well. I think Chris mentioned university campuses, hospitals, financial institutions. They're all looking at these things, and redundancies are important. If you more and more so, networks are business critical, right? It's critical infrastructure, and if your infrastructure goes down, that's a major problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's also why we put a lot of infrastructure offerings at the edge on the customer premise. So, if a manufacturing plant is reliant on a private network and reliant on some AI services that are running on top of that, they don't want that factory line shutting down if they lose their connection to the internet, for example. So that's why we have offerings now that take our cloud out to the customer premises, so that to support really these mission critical use cases.
I think that's a really important point. I think both of you made, though, is businesses tend to look at things as a term of cost, right? They especially infrastructure, right? That's a sunk cost. It's either a capital cost or an OpEx cost, depending on how they look at it. But I do think that that's one of the things that they do fail to look at is that cost of downtime, right? Because it's like how much, you mentioned, Alistair, that especially car manufacturers, they're really good at that. They know, I've worked with a couple in the past, one specifically on a private cellular network, that they know down to the dollar how much, and down to the second how much it costs them for their line to be down. I don't think other industries are as good at that, but I think that as people tend to look at their network as being critical infrastructure, I think they probably should start taking a look at how much downtime costs them and compare that to what they should spend on that redundancy, right? Are they willing to be down as opposed to spending the money on ensuring their network is redundant and able to handle those outages, even if they are just something like a power outage, right? Because that is enough. Power outage is enough to take down your entire network all by itself without anything without it being anyone's fault but the infrastructure itself.
Yeah. Last month it was the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, which I attended, and I was speaking to some people from a manufacturer, and we were talking about some handheld devices, some smart devices which they were using, and they said they were having trouble connecting to their network, and I said, "Oh, what network?" And they said, "Oh, well, it's currently a Wi-Fi network." And to your point, Maurizio, they knew how much time it was. Each worker was losing per day just waiting for their handheld device to connect to the network. So it was a number of people every day through the week. I forget the exact number, but it was about 20 hours if you added it all up. 20 hours is a lot. I mean, that you close on a day of lost time there. And like I say, and I had to reuse these quotes, but time is money, right? And so many of these things which we're doing has something to do with coming down to some time benefit, some time savings, some time or downtime reduction. So many of the use cases can be eventually boiled down to a speed increaser or a time saver.
Yeah, and that's where the reliability of cellular also comes into play, because it's one thing talking about people with mobile devices, but where the world is going to, it's everything is connected all the time, and everything is generating data. And so these factory floors have thousands of sensors, thousands of cameras, thousands of devices creating data that needs to be made sense of in some way. So the processing of all that data needs to happen quickly and needs to happen in real time, and then decisions based on that data need to be made. So that's, seconds of downtime can actually result in hundreds or thousands of devices stopping or losing connectivity, and then the whole system breaking down. So it's vitally important that you take that into account in the network design it in a way that it's fully redundant and gives you the performance you need, not just for today, but also thinking further forward as these networks grow and become more complex, taking that into account as well.
I think, one of the things that people also don't consider is I remember, I think this was a couple years ago, we were working with a customer that was a logistics port, and they were using autonomous cranes. And so the private network was helping to do location between the autonomous cranes and manned vehicles and then people just walking around, right? And so that network right there becomes not just business critical, but a life safety issue, right? To be able to locate all those things and coordinate the movement of all those things. So 100%, I think it is also looking at that return on investment and that dollar finger, but also ensuring, especially where you have autonomous machines that are in close coordination with people, ensuring that they are able to do that location in close coordination.
Yeah, I was just going to make a similar comment, but also what Chris was saying, you said about reliability and then adding thousands of devices, that also brings up the question or the need to scale, right? We add in more and more things to these networks. The scale is just growing. And as the trend towards private 5G, private cellular, picks up, as people adopt it more and agree to the benefits of it, that's just going to accelerate. So as you start scaling your operations with new users, new devices, new SIM cards, things like 5G technology are really become an answer to that. And then, Maritza, what you were saying with health and safety as well, we spend a lot of time thinking about, some kind of efficiency of cost, efficiency of productivity. But the health and safety thing is absolutely crucial, especially, again, I'm focused quite a lot on sort of industrial sectors, that's big, heavy machinery. And so you need to make sure that your people are safe and they're out of harm's way. And there are really cool use cases and things which are doing exactly that. Digital twins and collision detection and whatever the examples might be there, but they need to be running on a really reliable network, like a private cellular network.
Are there challenges that come with scaling a private cellular network?
The challenges with scaling any type of network will exist. I think what we do see quite often in private cellular deployments is a deployment that starts with one use case, and then the customer will get business value from that use case and say, actually, we've identified these 2 or 3 other use cases. So it's very natural for them to grow, but often customers are not necessarily sure exactly what's going to be required, right? So how much data is going to be generated, and what performance do we need from this network? What throughput are we going to be asking for? How dense are the devices in your factory or mine going to become? And so that's not always clear. But that's why you need to work with providers that have done it before, that can scale easily, and what we have between Ericsson and AWS, and what a lot of the news that you're going to see, PR coming out this year, is an integrated platform. So it helps to scale by designing an integrated platform together, which is what we're working on right now with Cradlepoint and Ericsson and AWS all together. And then after it's been deployed, once it's been deployed, we build in that scalability to make it simple. And it's crucial for customers, especially enterprises who have been buying IT networks for a long time. They don't want to deploy capacity that they don't need. So it's crucial to give them something that scales, give them something that starts at a price point which is relevant for their initial use cases, and then scale it after that as and when they layer on use cases. And we need to make that easy for them, which is what we're working on together.
Yeah, Chris, I keep on thinking in my head I've got something good to say, and then you say it before I get a chance. But
we're actually feeding him. We're telling him what you're what you're thinking.
But that's I mean, the scale comes from device density. It can be geographical, right? And I think scaling a cellular network is, as far as I'm told, is easier than scaling or expanding, should we say, a Wi-Fi network, building in infrastructure and things like that. But yeah, so again, I keep on thinking about ecosystem. It's bringing the ecosystem together to provide these things, working with customers, and system integrators is absolute crucial part of the ecosystem to make sure that it's done properly and it's planned properly, so that when you send it out to the customer, it's ready to use. Because these things, we try and make them as simple as possible for the end user, but they're not necessarily simple. It's quite complex. But the companies like Ericsson, AWS, Cradlepoint, we take on the complexities so that the customer doesn't have to. So with that, when the system is deployed, it's hopefully ready to use. There might be some testing, lab environment initially, but the idea is to try and get that system to be used and adopted and in operations as quickly and fast as possible. So to make that as simple as possible, to make it easy for enterprises to build use cases or add use cases, add applications on top of that network is absolutely crucial as well.
Yeah, that's definitely what we set out to achieve. Last year we launched a new partner program, ecosystem program called Integrated Private Wireless, and it sounds like Alistair was just almost reading from my first call back there, because it's exactly
the tables have turned.
Yes, because it's exactly the same message. It's we take on the complexity, we abstract it away, so the customers don't then need to worry about it. So we make it as easy as possible for customers to consume private networks by managing the complexity. And that's the R&D track that we have together between the two companies is there to address that. Right? These are big, complex technologies. There's no question. But it doesn't have to be a big and complex experience for the customer. So it's, our job is to make it as easy as possible for them.
I'm going to steal your words here for a second. When we say big and complex, I think a lot of times with private cellular networks, we are using examples of manufacturing, campuses, large spaces, industries that are growing rapidly. Are there any industries or use cases that a private cellular network is really not suited for?
Well, the challenge with this industry is it is so broad, and the really private cellular solutions are as valid in the sports industry as they are in the medical industry, as they are in the energy industry. It really cuts across every industry vertical, and every market segment within each industry vertical. But the key, I think, to realize is that there comes a point when you need the performance or the guaranteed density or the guaranteed throughput and the security. It comes a point where you need private wireless, private cellular. But for many use cases, if you don't require extreme performance, if you don't require extreme low latency, if you don't require the security that you get, then Wi-Fi is perfectly good enough. And there are many networks where mobility is not needed. So you don't even need Wi-Fi. It could be wired. So we're definitely not saying private cellular is some sort of one size fits all. And it's not a magic bullet. It's not going to disrupt or remove the other technologies. It really just adds on top.
Yeah, I that was well answered. I got nothing really to add there. The tried to come up with an industry or an area where a private cellular network might not be needed. I think you can be a little bit limited by your imagination. I mean, I could come up with a reason why I might need it in my own home one day, maybe not immediately, but one day that might be valid when there's more personal data, of myself, which is enclosed in my home environment or whatever it might be.
Or if you're operating a nuclear operation in your basement.
Yeah, well, let's not talk about that just yet. But yeah, so it's a big range. Yeah, I mean, it's. I think Chris said it right at the beginning. If anything can be connected, then it will be connected. Something like that. And the more things you connect, the more data which is created, the more personal data. If you want to use the example of your home situation or a hospital or something like that, private networks, maybe at home the extreme low latency or something like that is not going to be a problem for me, but like the security, maybe in the future that's where the private network becomes important. So where it might not be used, I don't know. You can make an argument for pretty much anything. It's just a interesting, fun exercise to see if you can.
Yeah. Well, Chris, Alistair, we so appreciate you guys joining us today to explore some of the unique and maybe more challenging aspects of private cellular. Chris, before we go, we'd love for you to share where our listeners can find more information about AWS and the work that you guys are doing.
Yes. So I mentioned earlier this program we launched last year. So it's called Integrated Private Wireless. So if you go to a search engine and search for AWS Integrated Private Wireless, you'll find there a portal, an AWS portal that describes what we're doing, many of the partnerships that we have, some reference cases, and lots of good information. There's also an ebook on there about our strategy and how we see the market developing. So please do.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Taylor, and nice to meet you, Chris.
So, Mauricio, one thing that I appreciated that Chris kept saying is that private cellular networks are not a magic bullet. And that was good to hear because as someone who writes about private cellular a lot for work, it's easy to focus solely on the benefits and like all the great places that this can go. But it's important, too, to consider there might be other underlying issues or problems within your industry or your business that you need to address before putting this in place and keeping those things in mind, that it's not necessarily the end-all be-all.
Yeah. I recall a situation when early in kind of the PCN, CBRS, especially when CBRS started to gain momentum here in the United States. I watched where someone tried to force fit PCN into like a fast food situation where Wi-Fi and wires were definitely the better way to go, especially just from what the customer needed and what they were trying to accomplish and the cost of the solution. And so it's just that as much as people want to integrate new technologies, I can't remember the author, but, Crossing the Chasm, as much as there's new, people want to be early adopters of technology, it really comes down to, what problem are you trying to solve and what is the best solution for that problem, and not trying to force fit a solution or have a solution looking for a problem. Mm-hmm. And so I think between, a wired network, a Wi-Fi network, and a private cellular network, I think all of those things are still going to remain applicable. And even within a private cellular network, you're still going to have legacy devices or even devices that may never end up with a private or with a cellular modem integrated into them that are going to need to connect either through Wi-Fi or wired. So I think private cellular really should just be looked at as another tool on IT or OT's tool belt in order to solve problems that they already have or problems that will present themselves in the future.
I was thinking as you were talking about this, how not trying to use it to solve a problem when there's maybe a better solution. And I couldn't agree more. And I hope that that's what folks kind of take away from this as well. So thanks all for tuning in. If you enjoyed our chat with today's industry experts, we invite you to rate and subscribe to What's Your Signal wherever you listen to podcasts. Visit cradlepoint.com to learn more.